felt that what they already had would allow them to win the war quickly and easily. The North had a large network of railroads, twice that of the Confederates, abundant resources such as farmland and factories, and a much greater population. They thought these resources would put them ahead of their Southern brethren. Their larger population enabled them to have a larger army, and their resources, such as the railroad system, farmlands, and industries, allowed them to support that larger army. The railroads were a good way to transport goods, which included supplies and soldiers. It was also a faster and a much more efficient way to do so.
The Northerners weren't the only ones who thought that they had the victory sealed. The Southerners were fighting on their own home turf, which meant that the Union had to invade Southern soil. This way, the Confederacy would only have to defend their land and could just wait the war out. The Confederacy also had very experienced military generals, such as Albert Johnston, Joseph Johnston, and Robert E. Lee. These men were veterans of the Mexican-American War and were very experienced in leading an army and thinking of military strategies.
As the war progressed, both sides realized they had to gain an advantage over the other by using new weapons and military strategies. Both sides used ironclads to combat one another. The Union used the Monitor to gain control of the Mississippi. The South used the iron-covered battleships to combat the Union's naval blockade.
The Union and the Confederacy also started to use newer rifles and cannons with improved accuracy that were faster and easier to use. However, generals never changed their old military tactics to fit with the accuracy of these new weapons. Soldiers could no longer walk in traditional formations to meet the enemy. It was much too dangerous. The weapons that were meant to be helpful were actually causing way more casualties than expected, yet each side was able to cause damage to the other using new technology.
The battles of Shiloh and Antietam showed exactly how dangerous these new weapons were. The Battle of Shiloh was fought at Corinth, near the Mississippi. Confederate troops caught the Union by surprise, and each side suffered over 10,000 casualties. However, the Union was able to secure a victory by forcing the Confederates out of the railroad center. This led to the Union having control over most of the Mississippi. The Battle of Antietam, however, was a result of extra caution. General George McClellan was overly cautious and spent several months training his army, giving the Confederates a lot of time to reinforce their troops. The two armies finally clashed at Antietam Creek near Sharpsburg, Maryland. This was the bloodiest day of the Civil War. Both armies suffered over 12,000 casualties. However, the Union was still able to claim the victory, boosting the Union's morale.
The Emancipation Proclamation forbid the use of slaves in areas that were rebelling against the Union. However, Lincoln did not have the constitutional authority to do so. The Emancipation Proclamation immediately became very controversial and had little to almost no immediate effect. However, it changed the entire focus of the war. The war was now a fight to end slavery. It was a human and a moral cause, not just a political one. African Americans did whatever they could to support the Union cause. Some of them would run away from their Confederate masters, others would just oppose them. Now that the South had made it clear that they were fighting to keep people enslaved, Great Britain had no intention of helping them. This would change the war forever.
Draft laws were imposed because they needed more troops. These laws forced people to serve in the war. However, wealthy people or slave owners with 20 or more slaves could pay to get out of the draft. This caused rioting because the draft was very unpopular. These riots, led by the middle class, destroyed property and people. It was called the poor man's fight by the non-wealthy working class, as they weren't able to pay their way out.
The South endured lots of economic issues as a result of the war as well. They didn't have as many men or resources in comparison to the Union. There was high inflation on all goods because of the Union's blockade on the South, which stopped them from trading cotton, the South's largest source of revenue. The Confederacy didn't have enough money or a large enough population to support their army. When the Union would invade the South's land, they would also destroy much of it, which in turn led to a food shortage and many riots.
As men went to war, the women were given more opportunities to take on more important community roles. They served as teachers and took over farms and plantations. This way, the Confederacy continued to function, and women became more important members of society. Women also became nurses on the front line, which helped with providing more attention to the wounded. This way, more men went home alive.
Lincoln and his generals needed to use military strategies and tactics to turn the tide of the war. One day, a group of Confederate soldiers went to Gettysburg to get shoes. Lee got word that a huge Union force was waiting there. He ordered all the troops to converge at Tashtown, 7 miles away from Gettysburg. The Confederates pushed the Union troops on Cemetery Ridge. General Longstreet suggested that the Confederates march away from the hill and threaten Washington, D.C. instead. This way, the Union would be driven off Cemetery Ridge and attack them where they were. Lee says no.
The Union generals used their high vantage point to their advantage. The first Confederate charge was put down by Major General Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine Regiment. Lee, however, refused to back down. He ordered General Pickett to charge up Cemetery Ridge yet again. Over 12,500 men marched over a mile of open field. Of these men, only 5,000 came out alive. The Battle of Gettysburg was over, and once again, Lee had lost 1/3 of his army.
As the Battle of Gettysburg raged in the east, General Ulysses S. Grant's army attacked Vicksburg in the west. At first, Vicksburg was not vulnerable, due to the fact that every time the Union soldiers tried to cross the Mississippi River, the Confederate soldiers attacked them. Grant decided to take a risky move. He sent 3 boats down the Mississippi to block off Confederate artillery fire. In the meantime, the Union soldiers crossed the Mississippi and attacked Vicksburg from its most vulnerable point, the south. They quickly laid siege to the city. This siege lasted 6 to 7 days. The capture of Vicksburg was important as they now had control over the Mississippi. This and the Battle of Gettysburg were key victories that turned the tide of the war.
Grant was given command of all the Union forces. Grant decided that he had to capture Richmond. he continued to attack and tried to break through the Confederates' lines. In the meantime, General William Tecumseh Sherman decided to do something bold. He used the strategy of total war. Total war means to destroy everything, including resources, land, and most of all, the spirit of the people. Sherman burned down several cities like Atlanta. He was extra brutal in South Carolina because they were the first state to secede from the Union.
Grant finally broke through Confederate lines on April 2nd. By the end of the day, Richmond was under Union control. With all of his escape routes cut off and the prospect of losing more men looming over him, Lee was forced to surrender. He surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse on very generous terms.
The war was over, and the country was going to get back together. However, the war took a terrible toll. The Union lost over 360,000 men, and the Confederates lost about 260,000. However, the war did have some lasting effects. It brought the nation back together and ended slavery. African Americans, however, would not enjoy the true fruits of freedom for at least another century. But no matter what the lasting effect of these fearsome and prolonged battles, the Civil War would be remembered forever as the bloodiest war ever fought on American soil.